Hi, this is Peter Carchonian with SuperTalent, and today I'd like to talk to you about SSDs, or solid-state disks. Now, everyone knows that SSDs are the future. After all, these drives are much faster, they're lighter weight, they use less power, and they're more rugged. They're better with shock and vibration, and they're better with temperature. But many of our customers seem to have some misconceptions that maybe SSDs aren't quite ready for prime time. Well, let's go ahead and address those. Now, the number one misconception my customers have is that SSDs actually become slower and slower over time. That's what they've heard, that's what they've read. Well, I would argue the same thing was true for hard drives. With hard drives, when you would write to it, you would write sequentially because your drive was brand new, clean space. But as you would delete files, you would leave pockets of clusters. And when you go back and rewrite over that same area, you had to use those pockets of clusters and your data would become fragmented. And with that fragmented data, it meant your drive was actually performing slower and slower. But luckily, there was a tool called a defragmentation tool that would go through and defrag your drive, keep it at optimum performance. Well, the same thing is true with SSDs. Now, SSDs, you don't have to worry about clusters being in order because it has amazing seek times. But SSDs do write in blocks of data at a time. They write blocks, and those blocks are made up of pages. And when you delete a file from an SSD, it actually goes and marks those blocks, those pages and blocks that were associated with your file. It marks them as invalid. So imagine if you had a block of data that was partially valid and partially invalid, and you wanted to write to this space again. What it would need to do is copy that entire block to cache, erase the real block, and take your valid data, copy it back, and then write the new stuff. And that could take some time. There's your slowdown. Now, luckily for us, just like a defrag tool, there's also a utility that became available. This is called a wiper utility. And the wiper utilities were manufacturer-specific little utilities that would go through and clean up. It would look for blocks of data that had invalid data. It would go ahead and move them aside, erase everything, copy back the valid data, and this drive was ready to perform. So it was keeping it at optimal performance. We don't have to do that anymore. See, with hard drives, that's where technology stopped. You had to run your defrag tool, and you still do. It's still valid technology. However, with SSDs, they went the extra mile. In firmware now, they have something called garbage collection. It's basically a wiper utility that's in firmware. It's ready to run in the background. So when you go get a cup of coffee, it's going to go ahead and look for blocks of data that have invalid data in them and go ahead and make sure your drive is always at optimum performance. Whoa, that's much better than a hard drive. But there's even something newer. It's called Trim. Trim is supported by your OS, and it's the same as garbage collection, but it's OS aware, so things are happening even faster. It's wonderful. All of our drives support both garbage collection and Trim. Garbage collection is incredibly valuable if you're running an operating system that doesn't support Trim. Windows 7 is currently the only one that supports Trim. So if you're running XP, if you're running Vista, if you're running a version of 7 that doesn't have Trim, well, then you want garbage collection. If you're running a Mac OS, you definitely want garbage collection. We have a whole white paper written about this that goes into it in a little bit more detail, and it's available on our website. So thank you, and you really can't go wrong with one of our SSDs because they both support garbage collection and Trim. Thanks.